further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Michael. Michael, hopefully you're there. You're going to talk to us now about the CEO performance management process.
Thank you, Alice. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Chairs of Trustees seminar. It's lovely to see you all here, and I hope you're enjoying the Indian summer that we're all experiencing. And I can see some comments coming through. The sun is shining in Yorkshire, so we know it's good. So good to hear that. So welcome, everyone. As Alice mentioned, this is particularly timely. You will all be considering in the midst of thinking about the CEO performance management for the year ahead, and of course looking back at last year's successes or otherwise, and also thinking about the priorities for the year ahead. So let's make a start and go into the presentation. So I think the first thing I want to say about the CEO performance management process is it is a really important lever, almost a bridge really, between your priorities as a board, your strategic priorities as a board, and your expectations and objectives as a board, and of course the delivery, the operational delivery of the trust, the executive leadership of the trust. So I think it's an absolutely crucial thing to get right, because it really does, the performance management process really does articulate, I think, what your priorities are for a 12-month period. And these may not be the final priorities, they may not be the final objectives. In fact, if your strategic plan is 3 to 5 years, it won't be, will it? This won't be everything in a nutshell, but what it will be is a clear indicator of progress being made by the organisation, and in turn the executive leadership within that 12-month period. So getting this right is really key. And I think one of the things we do too often see, unfortunately, and I'll come back onto this in a second, is that this is left by some trusts to the last minute, by some boards, by some CEOs to the last minute. And I think that's a real shame, because I think this process not only is, as I've said, is so important to delivery and the success of the organisation and the translation of the board's priorities into those of the executive leadership, but it's also crucial to motivating chief executives, to supporting them, to giving them a really important steer as to what their priorities should be. So to leave this too late, or to not give it the priority it deserves, I think is a shame. I think we see it too often in the sector, and that's why it's important. And the fact that you're all here today shows that this matters to you, and I'm sure you're all working on it, but it's too often neglected. So let's think about this a little bit more, and let's think about it from the point of view of you as trustees as well. So one of the things I really want to focus on is the, if we just go back to the previous slide just a second, James, one of the things I want to think about first of all is that the performance management of the chief executive is not an upgraded version of the performance management of the head teacher. And in our experience in the work we've done with trusts, particularly in the first few years of the trust sector, but we still do see it a little bit now, is that actually the performance management process does seem to reflect the work of head teachers, but it's then upgraded to 6, 10, 15, however many schools you've got. So rather than really making that leap to ensuring that the performance management process reflects the fact that these leaders are leading organisations in the widest possible sense, multi-million-pound organisations with a wide range of facets and disciplines to them, it's too often tempting, I think, for boards to say, right, let's just focus on school improvement across 6, 10, 20 schools, however many it may be, and that's the performance management of the chief executive. Of course it isn't. Chief executives are leading, of course, the school improvement, and that's the core business of trusts, but they're also leading HR, they're overseeing finance, they're overseeing the digital agenda, they're overseeing partnerships with government, partnerships with other stakeholders, and so on. So all of that has to be taken into account, because success across all of those areas underpins school improvement leadership and success. So one of the things we recommend, if we could go to the next slide, James, is that this reflects the Being the CEO framework. And what the Being the CEO framework does is it reflects the job of the chief executive. And that's the purpose of the book, that's the purpose of the framework, in that it helps boards, and this is a book for boards as much as for chief executives, but it helps boards and it helps CEOs really think about what the CEO role is in the round. And again, I constantly come back to this, that we are now working with people who are the executive leaders of multi-million-pound public sector organisations. I'm going to go on to the next slide because this shows the framework a little more easily. So that's a snapshot taken from the book. So here we are, the 6 dimensions of the CEO role. And they are as follows: translating vision into leadership narrative. So that is about the board's vision and ultimately the strategy that the board owns. And what does that mean in terms of how it's articulated, understood, believed in, subscribed to across the organization? So that is the first key role of the chief executive, is to make sure that your vision, your strategy is felt, understood, and connected with across the organization. Because if it isn't, if people within the trust actually think other priorities matter more, or other behaviors matter more, or other objectives matter more, then there's a disconnect. And we do see that in trusts where individual schools may have their own view of what success is or what the priorities are. So how well is the chief executive on a day-to-day, week-to-week level translating your vision and your strategy into what people believe in, subscribe to, and are committed to? And that, of course, can be reflected in their own performance management objectives, the objectives of the schools, the objectives of the organization, and of course, what people say about the organization, what it believes in, what it's about. So that's the first dimension. The second dimension is building an open, transparent, and constructive relationship with the board. Absolutely central. So is the CEO performing in terms of how they report to you, how they work with the board, what the relationship with the executive and the board is like? What does it feel like? Is it productive? Is it efficient? And how do the rest of the board members feel about the work and relationship with the executive and the CEO? Is it productive? Is it efficient? And we can look into that and think about that in a second in terms of what that could look like in terms of SMART objectives and so on. The third aspect is being the chief talent officer and culture maker. So as the CEO, they're leading a team, an executive team of a wide range of disciplines: finance leads, HR leads, increasingly people with digital expertise, as we've seen with the move to remote learning, but also the fact that we need to protect our organizations in terms of cybersecurity and so on. So that team of people around them isn't just a school improvement team of people, it's a team of people that lead the organization across a number of facets. So is the CEO, first of all, developing a team that reflects the fact that they're leading multi-million pound public sector organizations? But then beyond that, is this an organization that is recruiting and retaining people successfully? Is the workforce motivated? Is it satisfied in its work? Are you holding on to really talented people? Are you developing and growing really talented people? Or actually, are you losing people? Is recruitment a challenge? Are great teachers moving on? Is there a sense within the organization that it's not quite for some people? So this again is really crucial, because having the right people in the organization, the best teachers, the best leaders, but also those people working on the corporate services and those aspects of the organization is really key. So how well is the CEO doing in fostering that culture? The fourth area, enabling improvement at scale. So within this, we think about how the trust schools are doing against those very traditional top-down targets set by government and the DFE, of course. But is the organisation, is there the capacity within the organisation? Are school improvement leaders succeeding? Are they well supported? Are they motivated? And are we seeing general positive trends in terms of the development of schools and the progress of schools? And again, yep, that can be measured by those traditional measures of success, performance management, performance tables, Ofsteds, of course, and the traditional data. But it can also be measured by other things such as pupil well-being, staff retention, staff attendance, and so on. Ensuring sustainability and compliance, again, another key aspect to the work of trusts. Is the organisation not only on budget and are the budgets balancing, but actually is the organisation investing in the right things? Is it not only saving money, but actually developing services and developing capacity across a wide range of disciplines? So your trust may be wanting to invest in education psychology services. You may be, as we're going to talk about in a moment, thinking about upgrading the estate so it's greener and more sustainable. There may be an income generation element to what you're doing in terms of ensuring that some services are viable. So sustainability and compliance too. So within compliance, the role of the accounting officer, and is the CEO succeeding on that front. And finally, a really crucial aspect of the CEO role, building external relationships and partnerships with impact. So if we could just go back a couple of slides, James. External relationships, what's the relationship with the DFE like? Is the CEO succeeding there? The relationship with the RSC, the relationship with civil servants, but also what's the relationship with local employers like? What's the relationship with the NHS, the CEO of the local NHS or mental health services like? So lots of things to think about there in terms of how a CEO can develop relationships and partnerships that really add value to the work of the trust and build important connections to the work of the trust as well. So they're the 6 dimensions. And one thing, again, just coming back to this point one, really crucial, does the performance management of your chief executive really reflect the CEO role in the round? Or does it reflect head teacher +6 or head teacher +10? And of course, if it reflects head teacher +6, head teacher +10, there will be a focus on school improvement. But as we know, all these other aspects, recruitment and retention, sustainability, relationships, partnerships, and so on, actually feed in to support school improvement. And one of the things that we're very careful and focused on at Forum Strategy is actually, if you're a chief executive and you're responsible for the day-to-day improvement of more than 5 schools, you're doing a job that's unsustainable. You're doing a job that's unsustainable because if you leave, there isn't the capacity within the organization. You've got a key person there who would leave and who then takes on school improvement. So it's got to be embedded across a wider leadership team. But also it becomes unsustainable because I think it's quite impossible for one person to take on improvement leadership of more than 5 or 6 schools and do that well. So it's really crucial that the CEO role reflects the fact on that point 4 that they're enabling improvement at scale, not driving, not necessarily leading improvement at scale, but they're enabling it so that it becomes sustainable. So that's area 1. Onto the next slide, James. Point 2. CEO performance management should be based on a wide range of measures, not simply narrow top-down KPIs. I say this for a couple of reasons. First of all, because as we've seen, the CEO role is a wide one. It's interdisciplined in terms of a wide range of factors feed into the success of the role and the success of the organization. So what other aspects of data and ways of measuring success could you use as a chair and as a board? Well, parental satisfaction surveys. Actually, how do parents perceive the trust year on year? Is that improving on a previous year or is it declining on a previous year? Really important. You know, if we talk to, of course, the private sector, but also if you talk to organizations like the NHS, they will say that much of their success criteria depends on people on the front line and their views of the organization. So what we're seeing is more and more trusts gathering this kind of data, but not just gathering it for the sake of it, but building it into things like the performance management process of their CEOs. So do your parents feel more satisfied? Do they think the organization is performing well on a positive trajectory and so on? Or are you seeing a decline in that? Staff satisfaction surveys as well, key source of data. Staff retention data, key as well. Are people leaving the organization? Are more people leaving than coming in? Have you got some good people leaving? 360-degree feedback on the CEO from key stakeholders. We could spend a lot of time on the process of 360 feedback, but I think it's really valuable to gain the insights, not only of other board members, but senior people in the organization, key stakeholders as well, who will work with the CEO on a regular basis. Income generation data, you know, if your trust needs to generate income and become financially viable, does that feed in as well? So there are a number of ways in which we can measure the CEO's success against those 6 areas. Of course, top-down KPIs Ofsted performance tables and so on matter, but we also know the danger where trusts and schools are simply measured in that high stakes way, and it's that and nothing else. And I think for you as trust boards to know that, yes, that data is encouraging and it's in the right direction, but actually also knowing that the organisation in the round is performing well too. Benchmarking is important, and it's what we're seeing against even some of these areas such as parental satisfaction surveys, staff satisfaction surveys and so on, is that there is wider data from across industries and across sectors, not just in education, that we can begin to benchmark against. And of course, you can benchmark against previous year's data as well. The third area, just to touch on, is don't go overboard in terms of the number of goals and targets. We're going to send you an article after this session just on some thinking and work we did around CEOs and how many goals and targets they set themselves and how that links to their effectiveness. As a board, you want to give your chief executives a strong steer as to what matters, a strong steer as to what your priorities are. But these people aren't superhuman. And I think, like any of us, having a small number of very clear focus goals allows us to focus our minds and actually make progress strategically. Because as we've seen in the last 2 years, it's inevitable that they're going to have to react at times. It's inevitable there's going to be crisis. It's inevitable they're going to be pulled into different things. So keeping these goals and targets, the strategic goals and targets, very clear, very focused, is key. So do make sure that I would suggest 5 or 6 overarching priorities for the year ahead, reinforced by some really clear data indicators that are smart. Just a quote from Mark Hello there: the top CEOs spend a lot of their time on a few things. They spend more than half their time on what they determine as their top 3 priorities. Contrast this with an average CEO who will spend time on a whole myriad of priorities and never gets to many of them. This ability to focus is one of the key things that sets top CEOs apart. They'll focus on a small number of priorities at one time. They will not give up and they will not get distracted. And I think the danger is if you provide a shopping list of targets and goals, that is going to happen. There will be distraction, there will be overwhelmed, and you want to make sure that they're focused on the key priorities of the board at any one time and in any given year. So go on to number 4, please, James. And that's having a clear plan and structure to the performance management process. This is something that you will be well aware of. And of course, it matters at all levels of performance management, not just with the chief executive. But I just did want to say a few things about this. Obviously, transparency, consultancy, and good process is essential for good corporate governance. And if you model this as trustees and model a really efficient and effective process as trustees, that will be cascaded, of course, to the CEO themselves and to others in the organisation, to their leadership teams, to the head teachers, and so on. So what are some of the key characteristics of this? I think the first thing to say is that having the CEO's input early on in the process. So it's important to gauge the CEO's views as to what they think their priorities and their key goals will be in the year ahead. This isn't necessarily about the board coming in and saying, here are our priorities for this year, please get on with them, and these are your targets. Engaging with the CEO as early as possible in the academic year, if not slightly before, to say, right, what do you believe are your priorities and goals this year? And then to go back to the board. And I think for the board to have a discussion around that before the chair and whoever else works with them sets the targets is important too. I think sometimes we see CEOs and chairs having quite a cozy conversation, and I mean that in the fairest possible sense, cozy conversation about what those goals may look like, and without much reference to the wider board. So I think at this stage, as early on in the academic year, getting a sense from the CEO about what matters to them, consulting with the board on that, and then going back to the chief executive with a clear steer as to what you think as a board the priorities are, is quite key. But having that board conversation at the beginning of the academic year involves board members and gives them a sense of ownership of this process. So that goes to the second point there, really, board in the loop. So of course, the meetings themselves, the goal setting, the mid-year review and the end-of-year review will usually be the chair, plus maybe another trustee. I think it should be another trustee, plus a performance management advisor. But again, I think before you go into those meetings, always consulting with the board around, first of all, what do you think the targets should be? Do these sound about right? At the mid-year review, how do you think the CEO is getting on yourselves? What's your view on the progress? And then at the end of the year, also having a discussion at board level before you go into that final meeting as to how you feel the CEO has performed. So the wider board is always in the loop. Make sure the timescales are adhered to. I touched on this at the beginning, but really now is the time, if you haven't done it, to have these targets set, that the CEO's got that clear steer for the year ahead. Having a mid-year review in place really about February, March time, where the CEO can feedback on how they feel they're performing. You can consult the board, then talk to the CEO about how you feel they're performing. And then, of course, at the end of the year, having that kind of review after August, so after the results have come in. But of course, remembering that those results are one aspect of a wider consideration. And I've mentioned board feedback, keeping the board in the loop as to how they feel performance is going. And one element of that, of course, is the 360. I think it's crucial, really, that you involve some board members, key board members, in that 360 process, so that as you go into the end of year review, you have board's input into that as well as other key stakeholders. Number 5 is, if we just go to number 5, James, which is ensuring professional development is built in. So this absolutely, yes, it's about accountability. It's a key lever for you as boards to say, these are the priorities, these are your objectives within the year as part of the stepping stone to your wider strategic goals and plan. But it's also got to be, and can be, and this is the power of performance management, can be motivating, can be encouraging, and can focus on professional development. And there's a big sense, I think, sometimes with CEOs that because they're the chief executive, they've got to have all the answers. They've got to be there, the ready-made individual who's there to lead the organization and deliver. And that can't be further from the case, really. Partly because I think for many of you, your chief executives will still be relatively new to the job and will be working out what that job is. Either they've just come into the job or they've been growing a trust and now are only really taking on the CEO role. But also because the world is changing so quickly. And we think about, the impact. We're going to talk about sustainability in a moment. We think about digital and cyber security, think about the mental health agenda and so on. CEOs are wrestling with all these questions right now, and they don't have all the answers. They need that professional development. They need the opportunities as chief executives to network with other CEOs, to access opportunities to learn and develop and grow. So making sure that professional development is built in. Obviously, the forum strategy networks provide some of that, but there's a wide range of other opportunities as well. Just keeping that dialogue around professional development going, and making sure as well that CEOs aren't starting to believe their own hype, which can happen some way into becoming a chief exec. It's very easy, as we say in the book and in the CEO program, that as a successful CEO or CEO that's been in post for some time, people start saying yes more often than they normally would, start agreeing with you more often than they normally would. And actually, this is a really important way of saying, well, you're the chief learner of this organization. You've got to keep modeling learning and modeling an openness to the world. So, and this is a really positive way for you to do it as a board, to in a positive way, keep those CEOs, the mindset of the learner and the person who has to model that to the rest of the organization. Always ensure that priorities and goals are reinforced by high quality continuous professional development. And then on to number 6, which is just something we see quite frequently at forum strategy, unfortunately, and we do really warn boards against this, is please don't let the performance management advisor be the same person as your CEO's executive coach, or someone who's responsible for providing other kind of service or professional development to the CEO. Because even if, and for most of them, they won't intend to do this, there will be a confirmational bias in there. There will be an underlying conflict of interest. So at forum strategy, for example, We provide a leadership development network for chief executives and chief operating officers. If you were to come to us by email after this session and say, can you advise on the performance management of chief executives? No, we can't, because we are responsible for their professional development. So that immediately, however much we would try to avoid it, will become quite difficult. So what I would suggest is that talk to us about who we can recommend. Talk to us about who may be able to provide that in an objective way. And there are plenty of people out there who are well qualified to do so. May not always be from the education sector. As I've said before, this is a new role to the sector, and quite a few of the advisors out there are very experienced in head teacher performance management, but less so in CEO performance management. So just to end really by saying, please use the framework if you'd like to as a guide, as a general way of providing kind of an overarching sense of the different areas of the CEO role and where you may want to place some targets and objectives beneath those. So you've got the CEO role in the widest sense. If we could just move to the next slide, James. It's of course, it's all in the book, which I think most of you will have and your CEOs will have. But really having a sense of what that CEO role is, what it's all about, what the different facets and aspects to it are. And there is a section in the book on the relationship with the board, but also crucially the performance management aspect between the board and the CEO too. And then if we just go to the final slide, which I think, so if you are still looking for performance management support, please ask us and we can help with next steps. We won't deliver it ourselves, but we can point you in the right direction. More relevant resources will be shared with you after today. So I've got a couple of articles, one on this in particular, but also one on setting goals and targets for chief executives. And being the CEO is a really good starting point. There are some regulatory and kind of compliance things around performance management. Of course, that's a key part of this. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Chris Billington from our partners at Wrigleys, who's just going to talk about some of the compliance and regulatory aspects to performance management of the chief executive. So Chris, welcome this afternoon, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Unfortunately, I just seem to have lost video, but while I try and regain video, hopefully you can hear me. I'm going to be focusing very much on the governance compliance aspects, and just very briefly in the time allotted, cover some key elements as hopefully as a reminder for the chairs who are listening in today. You'll all be familiar with the governance handbook and the 3 core functions of governance. The key question has always been, well, how do you as trustees and as chairs of the board ensure that you can deliver on the effective governance? And as part of that, trustees place a significant amount of faith in their CEOs, and in essence, constitutionally, you delegate the executive function, the executive powers to the chief executive to ensure that both the organisation, both the trust as a whole, the schools individually, the whole organisation delivers on its charitable purposes, its educational purpose, but also supports the governance function in itself. And as chair, you'll find that invariably you become the link. You are, in essence, the line manager for the chief executive. And that's a critical relationship. And I won't go into discussions around how that relationship works and what happens when it becomes dysfunctional. But it's clearly something that as chairs you must be alive to. And one of the key elements in terms of that relationship is the timing and ensuring that matters are not left and are dealt with very quickly. And as part of that, it's recognizing that not all skills are vested in you as chair. Not all skills will be vested in your fellow board members. It is important that you have access to advice, and that will include, in particular, in relation to the sort of performance management aspects, HR advice. And sometimes that needs to sit outside of the organisation, outside of the trust, not in main terms, in terms of the actual management of the performance review, but certainly in terms of when things start to go awry, where you may be concerned about underperformance, then it's important that you as trustees take advice to ensure that you're complying with your compliance function. But just to look at the performance management from the perspective of the CEO, you'll appreciate that in essence, since 2014, pay progression was very much linked to a successful outcome on performance management. And as Michael has touched on, with many trusts, we have head teachers who have grown with the trust, but may not have necessarily made that transition into the CEO role, and they still come at the performance management with that pay progression very much firmly in mind. You'll appreciate that Michael didn't mention pay as part of his sort of 6 dimensions of dealing with the sort of CEO performance. But nonetheless, it's recognizing that what you may be looking for from a performance management process may not exactly tie with the understanding of the CEO. Traditionally within schools, there has been a concern over the sort of more narrow focus of objectives and clear questions over the effectiveness of performance-related pay on motivation and delivering school improvement. It's very much seen as a tick box to be endured, as opposed to the full benefit that performance management can bring to both the chief executive and to the trust as a whole. And part of this is also to challenge some of what Michael is saying about the performance management process. You know, yes, we have an annual review. Yes, it is recommended that you have a half-year review, but in order to properly deliver on the full range of objectives that you are going to be looking for your CEO to deliver to move the trust forward, performance management is an ongoing process. There are a number of challenges as part of dealing with performance review, not least is the time that it takes, but we all know and we all make that time available. But in part, it's also about making better use of the time that you already spend with your CEOs and recognizing that each and every one of those connections with the CEO is an element of performance management. And for you as chair and as the line manager, that key link between the CEO and the board, it's about remembering that when you are in contact with your CEO, you have in mind the objectives that you have set for the CEO, how the CEO is performing, that you're transparent about the process, that you're feeding back about the process throughout, so that if necessary, some of those objectives can be changed, priorities can be given to different elements of the objectives that you have set, but ensuring that it's a live, living process, because the fundamental objective here is to ensure not only the development of the CEO and the improvement that they can bring to the organization, but the development of the organization, the whole trust is critical as part of the performance management process. If there are underperformance issues, as I said, it's important that those are dealt with sooner rather than later. Again, the contacts that you're having with the chief executive are critical in that process. But again, take advice. You're not expected to be able to deal with it yourself as a trustee. You're not expected to have that expertise on the board of trustees, albeit we all do the skills assessment and seek to ensure that we have HR expertise available to us. These are matters which involve areas of employment law that we need to tread carefully and ensure that the rights, the employment rights of the individual CEO are recognised. I started with a reference to the governance handbook, so I just sort of come back to that in terms of, you know, it's important that you and a board regularly assess yourself, whether that's self-reflection or on occasion through the external assessments. Because if you're not doing your jobs effectively, then I can guarantee that your CEO doesn't have the necessary direction, doesn't have the necessary accountability, and they can't be doing their jobs effectively. So it comes all together. So hand back to you, please, Michael.
Thank you, Chris. And some really important points made there. I think this is ongoing. Absolutely, it's an ongoing dialogue between you and your CEO, and of course an ongoing dialogue between you and the board. One of the things I think that really effective performance management does do is it provides a clear guide for those conversations. And of course, you don't want every conversation to feel like a performance management conversation, but of course, before you go into your meetings with your CEO or before you set agendas, you can think about, well, you know, what are our objectives again as for the chief executive? So let's let those guide the meeting. So again, we're not straying into all over the place in terms of priorities and what we're asking the CEO to do. At the same time, it's ongoing, and of course you will want to refine things. There will, as the year goes on, there will be a need to do that, and to, as Chris alluded to, look at maybe refining the objectives and the performance objectives as you go through. Not radically, not fundamentally, of course, but to a degree to make sure that the organization's kept on track and the CEO is as well. The other point I think that really stood out there, just thinking about conflicts and potential conflicts, is HR advice. And internal HR advice is all well and good, but of course, most of the time your HR director will be managed day to day by your chief executive. So if there is a potential issue around that, or you as a board you feel you need substantial HR advice in relation to the process, just being really careful and mindful of that.